You Season 2 has been officially confirmed by Netflix and will move from American network Lifetime to the global streaming site as an original series. This second series of You is based on the novel sequel to You by author Caroline Kepnes and will see Joe move to LA. At the moment, it looks like Joe, played by Penn Badgley, might get away with his serial murders, but will Officer Nico, Michael Mays, the man who stopped him on the way to Peach's, Shay Mitchell, house, expose him? Warning, this article contains spoilers about You. Will Officer Nico expose Joe in You Season 2? It is unknown if Officer Nico will expose Joe in the second season of You. The first series was loosely based on the first novel of the same name by Caroline Kepnes, and Season 2, based on Hidden Bows, is expected to do the same, so it is difficult to predict what will happen to Joe. Officer Nico was the policeman who stopped Joe after he crashed his car on the way to Peach's house. Joe woke up in the car with a head wound and managed to semi-disguise his injuries. Officer Nico at first seemed suspicious of Joe's erratic behavior, but the bookstore clerk was smart enough to convince him otherwise. Joe pretended to have an alter ego and said he was visiting family nearby. He gave his name as Spencer Hewitt, the nephew of Mr. Ivan Mooney, Mark Bloom, who is the bookstore owner where Joe works. Joe then made up a fake backstory, and to convince him he was rich, he asked Officer Nico was a keen sailor. He even invited Officer Nico to join him at the house and on the boat sometime. Will Joe frame Raj? Partly convinced by Joe's lies, Officer Nico wrote down the license plate numbers of his car. Little did Officer Nico know, less than 24 hours later, Joe would go on to Peach at her home and frame it as a suicide. Later in the series, Officer Nico remembers his encounter with Joe on the road towards Peach's house and briefly considers him as a suspect. From his police car, he traces the license plate and calls Mr. Mooney's bookstore and asks for Mr. Ivan Mooney, who the car is registered to. Will Peach return? Joe answered the phone and remembered the fake identity he made up as Mr. Mooney's nephew Spencer and pretends to be Mr. Mooney on the phone. He says, "I gave that car to my nephew Spencer." Is he in trouble? Officer Nico replied, "No, I was just calling about a little fender bender he had that day. It was nothing. Have a nice day." After Joe hung up, he said to himself, "That was too close." Later in the season, viewers find out that Mr. Mooney is paralyzed and can no longer speak after a so-called stroke. It is unclear what actually happened to Mr. Mooney and if Joe, in fact, harmed him. Will Joe be exposed by DNA evidence? Joe was able to successfully manipulate Officer Nico into believing his story, and it looks like he will get away with Peach. However, it may not be Officer Nico that exposes Joe as the but the DNA evidence left at the scene. If officers discover the jar of urine Joe left at the house, he will surely be exposed as the real the private investigator. Officer Martin, Sean David Cooper, even revealed to Joe that items from the house had been sent away for DNA testing. However, the only evidence we see being taken away from the scene to be examined was the toy Raj Gerard Lobo used, which will definitely link him to the crime scene. Fans will have to wait until Season 2 to find out what will happen to Joe. You Season 2 is currently in production.